This is the Dzogchen Sunday Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For multiple decades, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that you would not have to. Whoops, wrong button. Let's see if I can't fix that bad boy. It is Obi-Wan Kenobi early Wednesday morning. Come, let us meditate like a Jedi after we explore the third and final verse of the Cuckoo Song of Pure Presence, a Dzogchen classic. It is already perfect, so exertion is redundant, and spontaneity is ever eminent or natural. As they say on South Park, what? So here's how it works. One moment. Guest invite, guest invite, guest invite. Danu, welcome. So it is already perfect, so exertion is redundant. For this to make sense, we need a bit of context. So I'm going to push button number 2. Why do many mythologies explore a fall from grace? Sit down with a competent archaeologist or anthropologist, and they will tell you there is evidence to suggest that our Paleolithic ancestors enjoyed a proto-communistic culture that conditioned them as individuals, to be flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. After a couple 100,000 years, maybe a few 100,000 years, when our ancestors endured the advent of the Neolithic revolution, they were subjected to a type of proto-capitalism that took human society and placed it on its head. And all of a sudden, people were being conditioned as individuals to be the opposite, to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. So if you are a geek like me, we went from being conditioned to being like groovy Qui-Gon Jinn to being more like grumpy Mace Windu, to being less like the dude and more like the Big Lebowski. So, with our rigid thinking and our controlling tendencies and our elitism, instead of living in harmony with nature and in harmony with each other and in harmony with ourselves, we were driven by dread, the dualities of dread and desire, to become Mr. Fix-It. Now let's return to this morning's teaching text. And so let's see, got to do some math. What's 220 take away 6? About 14 centuries ago, the great Buddhist reformer Prahe Vajra of the Swat Valley, also known by the Tibetans as Garam Dorje, said, you don't need to fix yourself. We don't need to control what we see or hear or feel or taste or smell. We do not need to control what we emote or intend or think or remember or imagine. Doing so does much more harm than good. Doing so indulges our controlling tendencies, indulges our rigidity, indulges our elitism. And that journey might take us many places, but it will not take us to a place of peace or love. I like to explore that now from the perspective of neuroscience. But first, let's see. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Okay, so here we go. I'm going back over yonder to another page. Sturgeon's law, Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks. That suckiness looks like Yang's religious or irreligious patriarchy. Once again, that suckiness looks like being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. You can tell when someone is indulging those tendencies because they overuse, they overfocus and overanalyze, thus exhausting their dorsolateral and medial prefrontal cortices, thus triggering their amygdala, the seat of both anxiety and aggression. Now here's the irony. Like an operating system working in the background of your computer or your smartphone, our autonomic nervous system, whose core is found in our spinal cord, is just chugging away, but we're too busy actively competing against it. However, when we set some time aside, perhaps once every 12 hours or so, to passively cooperate with the core of our autonomic nervous system, something amazing happens. The anxiety and aggression of our amygdala is calmed. And the empathy latent within our anterior cingulate gyrus is gently stimulated. That's big. That's huge. Similarly, by passively cooperating with the core of our autonomic nervous system, our awareness and our peace are multiplied. Now let's go back to the teaching text. Button 7. Therefore, we don't need to actively control what's going on. Let's take a deeper dive into neuroscience. So we return to, I click this button, then I go back to button number 2, and here we go. So passively cooperating with our autonomic nervous system sounds great, but how do we do it? Because if we knew how to do it, we would have done it already. So here's the deal. Every time we inhale, let me jump back. It's a 2-step process. The first step is mindfulness, not concentration, not focused, but mindfulness. And there's a difference. Bear with me. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we have evolved to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice all mind's antics of perception, emotion, intention, cognition, recollection, and imagination. All of them. From the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque, including from the inconvenient to the convenient, or vice versa. The question remains, what do we do with all that stuff that we noticed? That brings us to the second component, meditation. You see, every time we exhale, we have evolved to automatically relax, physically relax and mentally release during our exhalation to such a degree that that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, less defining, and as non-graspable as a vast, empty void. Now, a simile is only as useful as it is relatable. Therefore, we have to ask the question, what? What is a real-world example of a non-graspable, vast, empty void? Well, how about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could look tantalizing to the eye, could feel non-graspable to the hand. And so you see that no self and emptiness are simply figures of speech used to describe the fleeting experience latent within each exhalation. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If that's it, if it's just fleeting, if it's just temporary, and it goes away the next time we take an inhalation, then why bother? To answer that, we have to redefine our idea of enlightenment. Those who are rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, dun dun dun, have committed the logical fallacy of moving the goalposts and made enlightenment completely contrary to the teachings and completely unattainable, which keeps them in business. People keep coming back to the temple every month and giving them money and making offerings. However, in the second to the final passage of the Buddha's discourse on the four bases of mindfulness, he explained that one could master the path in as little as 7 days. 7 days is pretty quick. Sitting down once every 12 hours for a week and then being enlightened makes me wonder if Buddha was using a different definition of enlightenment. In institutional Buddhism, we have this weird, grandiose, irrational definition of enlightenment, that once you're enlightenment, you only have good luck, and you only feel certain emotions, and you never feel other emotions. But when we look at the life story of Lao Tzu, or the Buddha, or the Christ, we see these teachers with wisdom and love experiencing some misfortune. Lao Tzu was driven out of court. The Buddha was forsaken by some of his students and eventually was assassinated. And of course, the Christ was tortured and crucified, but then I wax redundant. So we look at these people and we see that they didn't have good fortune all the time. There's a very famous passage in the Gospels where Jesus wept. And so we see that Jesus could, that a great spiritual being could experience turbulent emotions. Forgive me for quoting the Bible again, but there's a passage where a woman who was ill, and she reached out and touched Jesus, and Jesus said, "I felt the power go out of me. Who touched me?" That shows that in that moment, Jesus did not have literal omniscience. Perhaps he had metaphoric omniscience, but not literal omniscience. And so we see that an enlightened being is not literally omniscient or literally all blissful all the time. Then what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is simply mastery of the Eightfold Path. And all that is, it is simply mastery of the techniques that help us cope. It does not eradicate the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare said. It simply helps us to cope with them so that we become the people that our dogs already think we are. So let's explore how that works. Welcome to the lazy bastard path of easy and quick enlightenment. The seventh and eighth folds of the Buddha's Eightfold Path are the mindfulness and meditation whose instructions we just explored. Simply by playing with mindfulness and meditation, or I should say cooperating with the natural processes of mindfulness and meditation once every 12 hours or so, we automatically master the remaining 6 folds of the path. But what do we mean by mastery? As children, we mastered using the toilet instead of our diapers. We mastered brushing our teeth. We mastered tying our shoes. We mastered riding a bike. We mastered reading, writing, arithmetic. We are master machines because all mastery is getting so good at a task that we practice it spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. So we can get that good at this entire Eightfold Path just by cooperating with the natural mechanisms of mindfulness and meditation once every 12 hours. The more we sit and breathe and watch and rest, the more we cannot help but notice how that which we watched during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less permanent, less stressful, less defining, and less graspable during the exhalation. The more we sit and breathe and watch and rest, the more we can't help but practice kind intention, kind communication, kind conduct, and even kind commerce. Allowing ourselves to be drawn away from capitalism's habits of cruelty and competition into communism's habits of compassion and cooperation. And here's where the exciting final point, the 6th bit. The more we sit and breathe and watch and rest, the more our choices and utterances and deeds flow, not from contrived calculations, not from wild scatterness, but instead from love's deeply centered spontaneity, the same love that comes from our anterior cingulate gyrus, the same love that is gently stimulated by our practice of sitting and breathing and watching and resting. Now, this is known by many names, such as right effort or effortless effort, or doing without doing, or if you prefer Chinese, Wu Wei, if you like English, going with the flow, or being in the zone, or expedient means. And that is exactly what is being addressed in the root text. So quick like a bunny, I'm going to push button number 7 and drag us kicking and screaming back to the root text. And spontaneity is ever natural. We don't have to force it. Just by cooperating with the iOS of our autonomic nervous system, we're able to use all the organelles of our central nervous system in the most sustainable way. When we read the biographies of Nobel laureates, we see a pattern. These individuals, as children, experienced a fascination for the hard sciences. They devoted themselves to the mathematics and the chemistry and the physics, um, to excel in the study of the hard sciences. They got their bachelor's, their master's, their PhDs. They went to work in a laboratory and they began working on a project, and they did everything right, being fastidious in their measurements and procedures and notes, but inevitably they would hit a wall. And each time it was the same situation that was typified by the character portrayed by Robert De Niro in the movie 15 Minutes, which came out about 20 years ago. And in it, he advises his protege, listen, you cannot come back to a problem unless you first walk away from it. And so all these PhDs learned what Einstein has always told us, that creativity is intelligence at play. And they learned that they would not to forsake their training in math and chemistry and physics, but not to be so obsessed with the front of their brain that they ignored all the resources of their midbrain and their rear brain and their spinal cord and everything else. And so inevitably these people would walk away from the experiment, maybe go ride a bike or recreate or take a nap, and then they would have a brainstorm or a dream that would give them their eureka moments. So that's what's being discussed right here. Instead of trying to control and micromanage and be a helicopter parent to our life, instead of trying to manage our life, we live our life from love's deeply centered spontaneity, which is unlocked through the remarkably easy practice of sitting and breathing and watching and resting. So now I'm going to push a button on my, what's it called? I forgot, what's the bar at the bottom of the screen on your computer called? Toolbar. I'm going to push a button on my toolbar. I'm going to push button number, what's it called? 2 in the application. Going over to Word. You're going to select the right document. And now let us shift gears and actually practice the mindfulness and meditation of clarity and letting go, which can act as kind of a carrier wave of liberation's peace. It's super easy. As we passively notice air enter our nostrils, silently and mentally we can recite the verb watch. As we passively notice air exit our nostrils, silently and mentally we can recite the verb rest. So we don't want to make the mistake of actively focusing on our nostrils. That's the quick path to great crankiness. We don't want that. Instead, we want to treat our nostrils the way a piano student treats their metronome, clicking away on the shelf. They don't focus on it. They're too busy focusing on their sheet music and their keyboard. And instead, how do they hold the sound of the metronome? In passive peripheral awareness. And that's the same way we treat our nostrils. Just like a metronome, keeping the beat. as we watch and rest vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly, sitting impeccably, sitting actively, with our eyes gently closed, enjoying the psychedelic light show behind our eyes. The moment you have a specific question about the philosophies or techniques that support mindfulness and meditation, do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window. For I tend to check for questions about once every 13 minutes or so. Oi! Let's shift gears. And now let us practice mindfulness and meditation of bliss and letting go, which can function as a carrier wave of enlightenment's universal love. It's frightfully easy. All we gotta do is as follows. As we passively notice our chest swell with breath as we inhale, silently and mentally we can recite the verb feel. As we passively notice our chest subtly sink as gently we exhale, we could silently and mentally recite the verb rest. Checking for questions? All right, Kawabunga. There are two ways to play with energy work. One is in an effort to contrive an analog of peace or love, which I do not recommend. And one is to simply assist our body in actively sitting. For not all of us are young, some of us are old, and not all of us are healthy, some of us are disabled. And yes, selecting which verb we use during our inhalation does have an effect on our subtle energy. So if you're performing energy work on a friend who is ill or injured, When performing the clarity and letting go, you would rest your hands on their right, yes, their right foot or their right hand. And during the union of bliss and letting go, you would rest your hands upon their left foot or their left hand. And it's nothing supernatural or magic. It's just the fact that, physicists in the 1700s and 1800s learned that uh, various electromagnetic fields can influence other electromagnetic fields. And all we're doing is using our subtle energies and our loving intention and our peace in an effort to help them entrain to a more resourceful state so that their body's natural processes can better heal them. Sometimes it works like gangbusters, sometimes it works very, very subtly. In fact, instead of saying heal, I would say comfort. You're comforting a friend who is, you know, injured or ill and they're in the hospital or they're in hospice. This can help. I like to call it spooky Buddhist voodoo shit. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. For Meditate Like a Jedi is made possible thanks to the generosity of viewers just like you. In approximately 10 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's dusk practice of Meditate Like a Jedi. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.